What time period do you feel nostalgic for? For most people of around my age, generations X and Y, the 80s and 90s are the time periods they look back on with fond interest. This is only natural, as you will always feel attached to the pop culture you grew up with and which helped shape your tastes and how you view the world. Doug Walker has created a media enterprise from such nostalgia. But I have very little experience with the cultural zeitgeist of the 80s and 90s. Of course, I wasn't born in the 80s, but a lot of the cultural properties of that decade carried on into the next through reruns, and this is especially true of countries like Australia, where there were and still are constraints and delays in what and when American media reaches our shores. There were a lot of pop culture shows, movies, bands, and games that just passed me by because they were either shown before I was born, they never got here, my mother didn't let me watch them, in the case of TMNT and Power Rangers, or I just wasn't aware of or really interested in them. For instance, I was never really into Pokemon. We were a relatively poor household, so I never had or desired a console. As such, I was neither a Nintendo or Sega kid. Essentially, I was a Macintosh kid. I didn't have many toys, as I entertained myself with reading, writing, and drawing when I was younger, and I never watched TV in the mornings, which, in hindsight, vastly limited my pop culture and commercial exposure. I watched afternoon TV on our ABC channel, and its programming was about half American fare such as Alex Mack, Animorphs, and Nickelodeon, and half Australian and British shows such as Round the Twist, Genie from Down Under, Ghost Hunter, and Seriously Weird. So, I was born and raised in the 90s, but not by and large a child of the 90s, and my nostalgia for them is minimal. No, in the times I feel nostalgic, I look back at a single year, 2003. 2003 wasn't the best year of my life. The best years of my life were VCE, 2006 to 2007, when my academic and social lives picked up dramatically, and the following years spent in university, where I earned my degree in a great environment, learning fascinating information and gaining new writing and analytical skills with mostly wonderful friends and teachers. 2013 probably stands as the best year of my life so far for all the achievements I was proud to make, including completing honours and becoming an Australian Film Critics Association member, and the wonderful things I was lucky to have happen to me. Seeing the Doctor Who special in a cinema, finding a boxed copy of Deadly Tide, receiving a scholarship, and making so many friends. But 2003 was important too, and the most culturally amazing year I have clear memory of. I just started high school, Australia calls years 7 to 12 high school, just so you know, and so entered the first formal transitional stage from childhood to adulthood. I had the first flickering sense of my sexuality, or that I was actually attracted to the opposite gender. The third Lord of the Rings movie came out and swept the awards season, and I got to see it at Rivoli with my best friend Paris. And in 2003, the Matrix sequels, The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, were released, and for at least a year afterward, these movies were the coolest things in the world to me. The only other years in my childhood that gave me a comparable cultural thrill were 1998 for Godzilla, though we all know how that turned out, 2005 for the Doctor Who revival, and maybe 2001 for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And in my adulthood, they were 2011 for Deus Ex Human Revolution, 2013 for the Doctor Who special, and this year for, what do you know, the new Godzilla movie. The Matrix sequels were an enormous interest for my early teenage self, along with Myst, Prince of Persia, Deus Ex, StarCraft, Godzilla movies, Diablo, opera music, Jurassic Park, and the Alien movies. I was obsessed with the Matrix movies. I watched them frequently. I wrote a fan letter to Hugo Weaving addressing him as Agent Smith that I ultimately never sent, and even scrounged together a Neo costume. I've largely moved on and found new obsessions, namely Doctor Who, Deus Ex, and of course, films and directors in general, but I still have a place in my heart for the Matrix movies, all three of them as exciting, intelligent, innovative works with great potential that wasn't entirely realized. And that's why I call myself the Matrix Apologist. I call myself the Matrix Apologist because I come to the defense of the Matrix sequels when few others do, and they are worth defending, as I have and will demonstrate, despite numerous flaws. I already reviewed The Matrix Revolutions ages ago, so today I will concentrate on The Matrix Reloaded, the maligned and admittedly overblown middle film that nearly everyone seems to hate now. And it's certainly not without its flaws. The general vibe of Matrix Reloaded is that it's a little watered down compared to the first film, even as it ramps up the awesome action, and it has a fascinating theme of choice versus control, along with several smaller ideas that it doesn't quite know how to use properly. But The Matrix Reloaded is still awesome, okay? I say watered down because Reloaded isn't as graphic as the first film. The sequels had a collective budget of $300 million, but the first Matrix cost only $63 million. As such, the Wachowskis could take more risks with the ideas and violence within. For instance, in Agent Smith's fight with Morpheus, Morpheus is brutally beaten into submission, and we see how bloody and hurt he is. By the way, I love how diabolical Smith behaves in this scene. But in Reloaded, the action is mostly bloodless. The most we get is on the Keymaker's shirt after he is shot, and that trickle of blood from Neo's hand when he parries a sword. The relative tameness of the action in Reloaded gets a little ridiculous in Neo's fight with the Merovingian's henchmen, as people are getting stabbed in the face, gut, and limbs without any visible wounds or blood. And there's the Burly Brawl. In a movie full of great action, the so-called Burly Brawl between Neo and a horde of Smith clones, which is the centerpiece of the movie, is quite bad. There are some good moments, including some innovative choreography, the initial moves with the pole, and Neo's running spinning kicks, but overall the brawl has clunky, goofy choreography and too much physical comedy in an otherwise serious movie. I also dislike the brawl for Smith's sudden incompetence. In the first Matrix movie, Smith didn't always need to block, as he was so strong and resilient, but he still could and often would block enemy attacks and make short work of them. But in Reloaded, while the sheer strength in numbers of the Smiths does pose somewhat of a challenge for Neo, the individual Smiths now can barely block or dodge, and most go down in one hit, thus severely reducing Smith as a threat. Yes, Neo is superhuman, but so is Smith. For that matter, the Smith clones should have put up at least as much fighting resistance as this, especially in a large swarm. The action is strangely lacking in blood, and the Burly Brawl is terrible, but otherwise, the action in Reloaded is excellent, and I'll hear no more to the contrary. Most of the fight scenes in Reloaded are elegant, cool, and very well choreographed, and make the most of the reality-bending effects of the Matrix. The moves are efficient and stylish, and every fight scene, even the brawl, has at least one or two moments that make you think, wow. The freeway chase is also pretty amazing, as it's effectively 3 or 4 action scenes in one, with the only problem being the fact that you kinda lose sight of where exactly the heroes are going. Morpheus takes out a car with an Uzi and a katana, and that's why Lawrence Fishburne is the man. The action in Reloaded is more stylized and less bloody, and so a bit less realistic than in the first film, but it's still cleverly constructed and thrilling. I also like how the severity of the action escalates as the conflict and narrative progress. Neo's opening fight with the 3 agents shows him effortlessly taking out his opponents. His fight with Seraph, almost a fight as audition, has him pitted against an equal. His fight with the Smith clones shows him struggling somewhat, and Morpheus and Trinity's fights with respective agents have them clearly outmatched. This difficulty curve, so to speak, of the action reflects the impending threat of the machines and the urgency of the hero's plans as they come together. But if I may nitpick for a moment, if this kind of impact didn't kill Neo in the first film before his powers were awakened, and it doesn't kill outdated agents in the present during the Chateau fight, then why does it kill upgraded agents now? If the agents are charged with policing the Matrix and anyone who poses a threat to the simulation or realizing that they're in one, then Agent Thompson sure made it more obvious with that car-crushing leapfrog.
But it doesn't matter, because that shot was awesome.
And Agent Thompson didn't really need to jump out of the skyscraper in pursuit of Trinity, did he? She would probably die from the fall, whatever Agent Thompson did. And if Neo was flying at a speed fast enough to pull a vortex of cars and rubble in his wake, then both Neo and Trinity would have likely exploded into mush as soon as he touched her. Most of the action, excluding the Burly Brawl, still gives me great visceral joy when I watch it. But beyond that, Reloaded is also a smart, ambitious film with an engaging story arc about control, some very cool ideas for expanding the Matrix universe, and some solid character development, with a few minor missteps in some of the concepts it discusses, and a big error in part of the plot. Let's start with the character development. Reloaded introduces 2 new main characters and sheds an intriguing new light on an old one. Link, played by Harold Perrineau, is the Nebuchadnezzar's new pilot and operator, hired to replace Tank from the first film. I really like Link, as he's a loyal, kind, and good-humoured man who is hip and witty, providing some amusement while still being a necessary contributor to the plot. Link is deeply devoted to both his family and his job as operator, and tries to balance those commitments by calming his wife Z and convincing her of his faith in Morpheus and Neo. Link loves Z, but makes it clear that he will stand by Morpheus for the good they can do, especially since they are close to fulfilling the prophecy and ending the war. As such, Link is a very likable character for his sense of duty and the respect he affords to the people in his life. I also really like the small, touching dynamic between Link and Morpheus. Morpheus simply requires that Link trust him in his leadership, and this request is brought up in a moving exchange at the start and a funny, snappy remark just before the freeway chase.
Link, what did I tell you?
Yes, sir. I do, sir.
You share Link's overjoyed relief when Neo saves Morpheus and Link's trust in him is validated. But there is an added dimension to Link's need to trust Morpheus. If he didn't trust Morpheus, then he'd be away from home for long periods of time and risking his life and making Z worry for nothing. So, Link is a very likable, well-rounded character. And now we come to the Merovingian, played by Lambert Wilson. The Merovingian is just a brilliant character. He's essentially the Matrix's main crime lord, as he provides shelter and employment for exiles, which are obsolete programs that have gone rogue and refused to return to the machine mainframe for deletion. I love his air of aloof, urbane sophistication and the joyful crudeness beneath.
It's like wiping your ass with silk. I love it.
And his ideals are a combination of determinism and hedonism. The Merovingian asserts that we are all slaves to causality, the chain of cause and effect that governs our entire universe, man and machine alike, and since our lives are predetermined, we might as well enjoy ourselves. But he also believes that choice is simply the product of the relationship between those with power and those without, and true power comes from knowledge, or understanding the why of things. By knowing the reason and details of events around us, and grasping the cause and effect going on, we may more easily influence these events toward our benefit. Therefore, the Merovingian is, like me, a compatibilist, which is a middle ground position between free will and determinism. By possessing knowledge of the Matrix and its factions and power struggles, he has more influence and agency within this world's preset parameters. By the Merovingian's logic, people freed from the Matrix, known as red pills, and natural-born humans, have power over blue pills, people still trapped in the Matrix, because of their awareness of the true nature of the Matrix. But the Merovingian eagerly points out that he has the power over red pills Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity, as he knows the importance of the Keymaker and why he is needed, but they do not. I love the Merovingian, as he's probably the most fascinating character in the entire trilogy. Finally, let's look at Morpheus. Lawrence Fishburne is great in the role as always, playing him with calm, composed authority, and is much more proactive than he was in the first film. Fishburne's big moment of melodrama, as he delivers a rousing speech to the people of Zion, is also not unwelcome, as Morpheus uses his booming voice and conviction to face the oncoming Sentinel threat without fear. I also like the contrasting nuance of his character in Reloaded. Morpheus is essentially an inverted Merovingian, as he believes that choice is the main driving factor of the universe.
Everything begins with choice.
And he's not wrong. The events of the film are set in motion by a fellow Zion captain deciding to stay in broadcast depth so that the Oracle can contact them. Further along, Persephone chooses to give up the Keymaker, Trinity chooses to enter the Matrix and save her friends, Neo chooses to save Trinity rather than return to the Source, and, most dangerously, Smith, and indeed all rogue programs, chose to rebel and not submit to deletion at the Source. The Merovingian's exiles, a major strata of Matrix society, have their existence based on the choice of self-preservation. And going back to the Matrix's backstory, the Oracle, of course, chose to help the human resistance, but more on that later. The Matrix trilogy appears full of acts of deliberate choice, but Morpheus also believes in fate. He has always held great faith in the prophecy telling of humanity's liberation from the Matrix, and a prophecy is a preordained or predicted sequence of events that are thought likely to happen in the future. This belief in choice and prophecy may seem contradictory, but such cognitive dissonance is a common element in fiction, just think of George Orwell's notion of doublethink in 1984, and in the human state of mind. Morpheus may also be a compatibilist, like the Merovingian, as he believes in choice within the parameters of the prophecy, but while the Merovingian is very pragmatic in his compatibilist worldview, Morpheus's view marks him as naive. Morpheus stresses the primary importance of choice, but is willing to accept fate and prophecy, which logically minimize or negate choice, when they go the way he wants, and never considers that the prophecy may be an instrument of control. Reloaded really does portray Morpheus as flawed and unbalanced in his beliefs, despite his wisdom, and this is an intriguing aspect of the film's theme of control eroding choice on multiple levels. And I have to mention the Keymaker, played by Randall Duke Kim, who projects an aura of both solemnity and just being so happy to be here. The Merovingian, Link, and Morpheus are great characters. I just think it's a shame that Neo and Trinity, who complete the main trio, are simply bland in comparison. Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss are both good actors. I love Keanu, and his talk with the Oracle really brings out the best in him, his sensitivity, curiosity, and relaxed charisma, but Neo and Trinity are just the least interesting and developed main characters in the sequels, so they aren't as compelling to watch as the Merovingian, Morpheus, or Link. In this final stage of my defense of The Matrix Reloaded, I will now discuss the awesome philosophical idea underpinning the plot of Reloaded, along with a mistake in the plot and some flubbed smaller ideas, which I will get out of the way first. Counselor Harmon talks about the nature of control, and reasons that Zion controls the machines in its city because the people could destroy these machines if they wanted. But Harmon counters this by suggesting that these machines control Zion, in turn, just as the Matrix controls its prisoners, as Zion is entirely dependent on its machines for survival. It's a fair enough point, but it doesn't go anywhere, though Harmon does admit that he has no point, and it's a nice scene. The Oracle's explanation of X-cells is needlessly convoluted. She tells Neo that X-cells appear and act the way they do because of the system assimilating something that's doing something it's not supposed to be doing, and so come across as vampires, werewolves, aliens, and other supernatural beings. That doesn't make any sense, and it would make a lot more sense and be much simpler if they were simply decommissioned agents from earlier versions of the Matrix, which is apparently true as well. Besides, the only sense we get of the X-cells as imitating the supernatural is from the twins as, obviously, ghosts, the implications of Seraph being an angel, and Persephone killing a werewolf with a silver bullet, which is basically a throwaway gesture. Aside from the twins and Seraph, the presence of supernatural beings in the Matrix feels like a flimsy gimmick. And yeah, a big plot hole pops up in the freeway chase. If the machines need Neo to get to the source, and the Keymaker is essential to this objective, then why are the agents trying to kill the Keymaker? It would make more sense if the agents were simply trying to take him into custody again. Since the Keymaker is vital to the continued running of the Matrix, so not unnecessary as the agent claimed, the agents are basically sabotaging the machine's own plans. What can I say? The writers fucked up on that one. But the revelatory twist that the film builds up to is genius. Let me tell you why. Neo reaches the source and meets the architect, Helmut Bakaitis, the creator of the Matrix. The architect informs Neo that there have been 5 ones before him, and 5 Matrixes before this one. Not only that, but 5 iterations of the City of Zion, all of which places the time frame of the Matrix movies as hundreds of years later than previously thought. Neo and the other ones are the result of a glitch or systemic anomaly in the Matrix, but the architect has figured out how to control them. During previous versions of the Matrix, the architect observed that a certain small proportion of humans inside would unconsciously reject the simulated reality and risk exposing it, no matter how idyllic or horrific it is, and the architect had to deal with these disruptive elements. He then used Zion as essentially a pressure release valve for the Matrix's inhabitants, as Zion would house those people who would not accept the Matrix, thus preserving the integrity of the simulation for everyone else. And the One's role, beyond being a messianic figure rallying Zion to free more people incompatible with the Matrix, is to reboot the Matrix and rebuild Zion with a select few people so that Zion may once again serve to isolate those who reject the Matrix in the next cycle. Confused Matthew, whose own review of the Matrix sequels was one of the things that inspired me to become an internet critic, called the architect's scheme a shitty job of architecting, but I believe that this couldn't be further from the truth. Zion is a quarantine for undesirables within the Matrix, and the Resistance, the One, and the Prophecy are all tools orchestrated by the machines to preserve the stability of the simulation. Moreover, the benevolent Oracle is in on it, and has been manipulating the human resistance under false pretenses. The Prophecy is ultimately just another system of control. If you'll permit me a moment of fanboy gushing, I think this is a brilliant, game-changing twist that completely changes what we thought we knew about the Matrix and the people fighting against it. In my opinion, Reloaded has a great twist ending. Overall, The Matrix Reloaded is a well-written movie. The film establishes the importance of choice, but the Oracle's clairvoyance, Morpheus's belief in the prophecy, Smith's talk of how purpose defines us and leads us through life, the Merovingian's discussion of causality, knowledge and their relation to power, and the architect's shocking revelation all serve to erode the value of choice in the Matrix's world in a very engaging progression of ideas. And that's my most important reason for defending Reloaded. I am the Matrix Apologist, and I'm here to maintain that The Matrix Reloaded is significantly better than the general consensus makes it out to be. This review was, to a degree, influenced by my childhood affection for Reloaded and Revolutions, but having watched them again over a decade later, with far greater maturity and better critical skills, I think they still mostly hold up. While bloated and not completely clear-headed, and the featured burly brawl is awful, Reloaded is still a very clever, engrossing movie with excellent action scenes, some solid characters and development, both old and new, and an intriguing narrative with a great, satisfying chain of ideas and a remarkable twist. The Matrix Reloaded earns 4 stars out of 5. This is the Matrix Apologist, and I love The Matrix Reloaded. I hope I've changed your minds on this movie. Signing off. Cheers.